This, as we've been saying, is an extraordinary situation for most of us. This lockdown, this quarantine, the isolation, it's unprecedented. We humans are social animals, and staying within four walls for a long period of time can be really difficult for us. But there are some people who are used to isolation and living away from people. I'm talking about astronauts. Their jobs take them to a space far away from civilization, from society, even our planet. Astronauts have championed the art of thriving in isolation, and they're probably the best people to guide us through this lockdown. It is for this very reason that I've invited two very special guests on the show tonight, and I'm very happy to introduce them to you. Joining us on Gravitas tonight is astronaut Chris Hadfield. He spent 146 days in space. He's also the first Canadian astronaut to live on board the International Space Station. Chris is joining us from Ontario. Also joining us tonight is astronaut Scott Kelly. He spent 520 days in space. Kelly's voyage has put him on the list of Americans who have stayed the longest on board the International Space Station. Scott Kelly joins us from Houston tonight. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to Gravitas. Scott Kelly, my first question is to you. You signed up to go to space and live in a lockdown-like environment, but the people around the world did not sign up for life in isolation. They're stressed, they're anxious, and there are still many days to go. Does it get better with time?
Well, first of all, just to put things in the proper perspective, like you said, we didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for this. I did sign up for being in space, and I knew how long I was going to be there, and it was about a year. But it was such a long mission that I couldn't really see the end from the beginning of it. So in some ways, it's kind of similar. But I think the way we get through this is by having the right perspective, first of all. And that perspective is what we are doing is important. It might be the most important thing we have done as individuals in our entire lives, making the right decisions, following the proper guidance given by our governments. This now is our mission for all humanity, and we need to take it very, very seriously. And then there are things that we can do to live in isolation that will make it easier for us and will allow us to all complete this mission. And these are the kind of things I learned, when I was in space for a year. And some of those are things like following a schedule, having a very set schedule that allows you to accomplish the things you need to do in a day, but do it in a very, very planned and methodical way. Because if you do that, you'll find that your days go by much quicker. Time for a distraction, a hobby, if you can, something that has nothing to do with your work, nothing to do with, this pandemic, something that is just a complete distraction, whether it's reading, writing, art, music. So you need something else.
Right. Coming to you, Chris Hadfield, you were trying to accomplish a mission in space, and that should have been motivating, I'm assuming. But for the people under a lockdown, there is no glory in isolation. They're just staying at home. They're fighting something that came their way. What are your tips on surviving the lockdown?
Yeah, I think if you think the life of an astronaut is glorious, then like anything else, it's a misrepresentation. Most of the life of an astronaut is fixing the toilet and doing some extremely boring experiment or cleaning all of the filters. It's just normal life like everybody else. I think there are some really important tips for thriving in isolation. Number one is control the fear. And the only way I know to control fear is to understand the danger. And then understanding your own constraints, because everyone's got to take care of family and they can only, change their household so much. Then define a mission for yourself. It doesn't need to be NASA who gives you a mission. Just decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do. These are the things that are important to me. This is a great opportunity to whatever. It doesn't need to impress anyone. This is the weekend or the day that I'm going to paint that thing that I always wanted to paint. And then the last most important thing is don't let all of this just sort of drive you down. Actually start doing things. Take action. Do one thing. And once you've done one thing, it's easier to do the next thing and start working your way through your list.
Right. Scott Kelly, this lockdown can be really difficult for kids as well. They're used to their playgrounds. They're used to getting out. Do you have advice for parents with young children? How can we make the lockdown easier for them?
Well, they're part of the team. They're in this, and this is just as important to them as it is to us. Certainly, kids handle stress differently. I think it's probably, important that you don't expose them to the news as much as adults that need the news. But, let them understand. I think it's important to tell them what's going on, and then let them know that this is their performance, how they handle this, how they behave is just as important as every other person on this planet.
They might just believe it. Chris, you were away from the earth and your loved ones for 146 days. Did the isolation ever get to you? Did you at any point feel that this is just too much now?
When I found my internal sort of tolerance rising, for me, it's like you can almost like hear the noise in the back of my head. The noise level is just getting a little bit high. Or you notice that everybody around you is acting like a jerk. If everybody around you is acting like a jerk, then you're probably the jerk. And so it's worth thinking, okay, I need a little time out. And that's where you need to go and read a book or sit quiet or paint a picture or just have a very short nap. The only way that I succeeded on my 3 space flights was through support of each other. And that meant changing who we were individually. And don't be afraid to say, no, I need a 15-minute timeout or I'm going to be no good to anybody. I'll be back in 20 minutes and I'll be a better person.
This is advice for Twitter. What about you, Scott? You were in space for 520 days at a stretch. Do you remember any moments when the isolation made you anxious or dent your spirit?
So interestingly enough, I flew a flight that was 159 days before I flew a flight in space that was 340 days, nearly a year. And I found the 159-day flight towards the end a little bit harder. I was a little bit more anxious. I was a little bit more, felt like kind of the walls were closing in a little bit. So, and I think that's a result of having a plan of how to get through this. I learned a lot on my previous experience that I applied on my subsequent flight. And like those things, like I said, the schedule, following it very closely. I think it's important for us to pace ourselves, important for us to take care of our own health. In this case, get outside. I think it's important for people to share. Not only because, we're all not in the same situation, but also, that gives us, there's a benefit to the receiver, but there's also the benefit to the giver. And I noticed that in space when we had a couple of our resupply ships blew up and the supplies were getting low and we were sharing our stuff with the Russian cosmonauts. That has a positive psychological impact for both parties. So because I had this 6-month experience and I learned from it, I was able to deal with being in space for a year, I think, much better. And it was actually easier for me.
Staying alone also means a lot of me time. Does life in isolation make you more philosophical? Do people start responding to everyday things differently? Do you develop a new perspective on life, Chris?
I think it deepens you. So maybe that makes you more philosophical. I've been around the world 2,650 times. So I've been across India thousands and thousands of times. When you see everything from the ocean all the way up to the Himalayas, and you cross all of India in a matter of 3 minutes, and you do it hundreds or thousands of times, it changes your perspective. It unifies what otherwise we would see as pretty important differences. And not just for India, but for the entire world. If you can go around the entire world in 92 minutes, it's not very big. And so that, I think, allows you to see the common nature of being human, the things that each of us are looking for a little more clearly, the common battle of being a human in our particular 75 years on this planet, and the things that each of us aspire to. It also lets you see how old the world is and how tough our planet is and how tough life is. And that gives you sort of a sense of patience and optimism that, yeah, we have troubles to go through and we have to solve them at the individual level. But this is an amazingly resilient place that we live. And we can find a way to get through this. But it doesn't make it easier, but it definitely means it's possible.
I have another question for you, Chris. Experts of all descriptions are talking about how this crisis is going to change the world. What do you think? This lockdown, this coronavirus pandemic, how will it change the world?
I think what will change is if we learn things from this collectively that we then make part of our institutions. If we learn how to react internationally, if we realize that the place that this was spawned is the type of breeding ground that we can't allow to exist on Earth. If we find a faster way to create vaccines, if we can institutionalize the lessons learned, then they become much more of our societal normal. But from an individual person point of view, it's a thing that happened during our lives, and it'll shift our thinking a little bit. But our children and our grandchildren, it'll just be a thing that happened to Grandpa, and it won't really affect them. It's normal human nature.
You make it sound so easy. You made some very important points too. We do really need to institutionalize the lessons learned from the coronavirus pandemic, be it our preparedness or our response to this crisis or learning to take care of our world. And let's hope that we come up with a vaccine soon enough. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on WION and for sharing your isolation stories. It was a pleasure talking to both of you.
Nice to speak with you as well. And I wish everyone there take care of yourselves and take care of each other and be well.
Yep, my pleasure. Be safe, India.